Welcome to Where Parents Talk. My name is Lianne Castelino. Our guest today is a mother of one, a two-time Olympian and world champion hurdler, sports broadcaster, and public speaker. Perdita Felicien is also an author. Her first book, My Mother's Daughter, is a national best-selling memoir. It was published in March of 2021. Perdita Felicien joins us from her home in Toronto. It's great to have you. Thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
I wanted to start by asking you, first of all, what was the genesis for this book and the tipping point for you actually going ahead and writing it?
I think it started, I knew I would write in 2012 because 2012 is when I'm done with racing, final Olympic cycle. I put up my spikes. And then I had the time to write, but I was so afraid of the story that it took me another 2 years to actually start putting the words to the page. And so for those 2 years, I'm like, oh, I'm doing research, right? But it was really an excuse to kind of drag my heels a little bit. But the idea of writing the story happened years before as, a young woman, really understanding my mom's journey. And I think the years would go on in my teenage life and then in my 20s where I'm like, my mom would reveal more about her beginnings to me. And the more I would hear what she was saying, I'm like, well, how did you turn all that into this? And I could never connect those dots. So you were pregnant as a teen, you dropped out of school, you'd sell on the beach, and now we're all here, living this really great life. And, you have 15 grandkids and things are going well. So I wanted to make that connection and find out how she was able to really change the trajectory of her life and the trajectory, of her children.
It's so interesting because it's an extraordinary story. And I wonder, how did you come to grips or make peace with the idea of sort of dredging up all of these memories, not just your own, certainly those of your mother, and how willing was she to kind of go on this journey with you?
So in 2014, when I'm like, okay, you've stalled enough, time to write, I called my entire family together in my sister's house, Vonette, at her home, and all of my siblings and their kids. And I said, look, I want to write this memoir. It's not about the Olympic stuff. I get there, but it really is about our family's life together. And it's going to dredge up stuff, icky stuff, uncomfortable stuff, emotional stuff. Do I have your blessing? Do I have your permission? And everybody said yes. It wasn't an easy yes to receive, but everybody said yes. Of course, the chief, yes that I wanted was my mother's. And she said yes. And the reason my mother said yes to me discussing some of these really painful moments, like being homeless and being a child witness domestic violence and other things, is because one, she always knew that her story of, leaving my father was one that she wanted other women to hear because she hoped it would inform them. Because the most difficult thing my mother ever did in her life, and there were many, but one of the hardest, she said, was leaving him. And then two, she also knew that as a young woman, I was trying to find out and figure out who I was. I didn't have all the answers. Who is my biological father? What happened, to my mother before I even got here? And, why are, some of those aspects of her life still alive in our lives now? She knew I was trying to find those answers as a woman. And she wasn't going to step in my way, or stand in my way rather, and not have me discover truly who I was. And I think that was her reasoning. But we dredge up the past, like you say, and dredging up the past, especially in many cultures, but especially West Indian culture, you don't air dirty laundry in a sense, that's what I've done.
Absolutely. And you don't know how it's going to be received, and you don't know what the impact on everybody whose story is entailed in there, how that's going to work out. Let me ask you, when you started writing, you were also not a mother yourself, correct?
No, Nova was not even a thought. Morgan and I were together, yes, but years away from having children. She didn't come about until years later, which completely changed how I was receiving my mother's story. But I think it is different as a woman who wasn't a mother herself, telling my mother's story at first.
So now that you are a mom and your little girl is 2 years old and this book has come out, earlier this year, I'm wondering what has been the impact of the book through the lens of being a mom yourself?
Oh, such a good question. You're a reporter as well, so you understand this. Like when we're after the story, we're after the story. So as I was researching my mother's daughter and putting together the pieces of my mother's life, especially before I got there, I wasn't really connecting as the daughter. I wasn't connecting as, the child in that story. I was like, I need to tell the story authentically and it needs to be true, right? I can't make stuff up and I need, certain details. So that was what I was after. Now, as I'm writing, full disclosure, it was very difficult for my husband and I to have Nova. We needed IVF. And so as I'm writing this story about my mother, right, this deeply personal memoir, suddenly I can't even conceive. And we wanted a family. So that informed my writing in a very different way. It felt cruel at times, I'll be honest. It's like, you're writing a story about your mother, is going to be called My Mother's Daughter. You want to have a child and you can't, right? So it didn't really make sense to me. And I'm also from a very fertile family. Let me just say that. So when Nova does come along, and she comes along as I'm editing in the final stages in around 2019, I really then understood my mother's drive. And there are things in the book that I questioned. I questioned why my mother stayed. I know my mother wasn't accepting of what happened to her, right? She was enduring it for a greater good. But I wondered at times why she didn't just get on the plane, tell off the Baxters, the family that brought her here and then kind of abandoned her. Even the family that she was working for, the Harrys, who were very hard to her while she was pregnant with me. I wonder why she didn't just tell them off and get on a plane and go back to St. Lucia. When I became a mother myself, I realized, this is more than just her existence. She wants more in the way that I want more for Nova, in the way that I want Nova to live a full-blown life, right? And I understood my mother in a way where I no longer questioned her reasons and wondered why she just didn't, just take the simpler road and just leave. I realized when you are here, a true mother who's connected to their child, you want your child to see more than you and to have more than you. And that was really her drive. And a lot of things, honestly, for me, Lianne, clicked in that moment.
Still, it's extraordinary trying to put yourself in the place of your mother and all of the adversity. It just seemed to come on in waves, and it seemed to be unrelenting. When you look back on it now, having researched it, connected all those dots, all the things you did in the course of writing this book, what struck you most about what got her and then you through all of that?
Yeah. Good question. So, I have some really good girlfriends and they've read the book and they're so good. They know my mom and they're like, your mom, I didn't realize she had all that inner strength and inner power. Because they would say to me, and I agree, I'm like, man, why did you stay? Right? It would have truthfully been simpler just to be like, this country does not accept me or love me, and welcome me. And I'm going to go to the small, tiny island of St. Lucia where I am accepted and I am welcomed. Looking at who my mother is, and I think at times with my editors, we kind of wrestled at times because they're like, did she really feel this way? Like Bruce, my bio dad in the book, who was also my mother's, domestic abuser, is still in our lives. He's my dad. He raised me. And a lot of people are like, well, why is this man still in your life? Like, why? And I'm like, I know it can be frustrating to someone who doesn't understand, but my mother is so forgiving to the point where you question, like, is this really it? But what I've come to realize, Lianne, is my mother's ability to forgive and her ability to keep a positive slant on even the most difficult and negative circumstance is really why she was able to endure, is really why she was able to push through. Because most people would have seen the difficulty that they were under, the weight and the heaviness of it, and to retreat to a place that was really less hard to navigate, right? Where my mother said, no, I know at the end of this struggle, there has to be something more. There is something more. And if I can just outlast my struggle, then I will be able to experience what this is for myself as a woman, but also for my children. So I really do think it's my mother's positive outlook on life that allowed her to get through. It's why, after my devastating, fall at the Olympics in '04, they called my mother on this phone, world champion on the ground, fallen, just devastated. And one of the first words out of my mother's mouth is, "You are the gold." I think some mothers would have been crying on the phone with me. Do you know what I mean? Just like wailing or trying to make sense of this moment, which I'm sure she was. But she kept a positive slant and she kept it together for me. And in those moments, she uttered to me, "You are the goal," because that's truly what she believed, that I am more than this moment. I'm more important than this moment. And her positive energy, she funneled to me. And that's what's gotten her through life.
That's such a wonderful story, and what a wonderful thought to share at that moment with your child. When you talk about connecting the dots, which was part of the reason that you wanted to do this story and write it, I'm wondering, is there anything that you discovered along the way about your childhood that was so striking to you that maybe it's something that you discovered that now impacts the way you parent your daughter?
There are quite a few things, right? I think when you go and you write a book that starts with your mother's origin story, I wasn't there. And I think realizing that my mother was offered, or the idea of termination was introduced to her when she was pregnant with me. And of course, she didn't know what that meant. Termination in the 70s and for a long time after was illegal in St. Lucia. So the idea of even aborting was not, a conversation that would be had. The island was very Catholic, very religious. So it wasn't even a thought. So as a young woman writing this book, having to go back and have that conversation with my mother about the idea of terminating me, and someone who's living and breathing today, right? That was a very difficult thing to confront and to have a conversation with. Because the truth of the matter is, I'm a very progressive woman. That would have been my mother's right? But there's something really uncanny about saying that out loud today as I'm living and saying that would have been my mother's right, but going back and knowing that if she had made that decision, then I wouldn't be there and my life wouldn't be my life at all, right? That was a very difficult conversation to have with my mother, and unearthing why she kept me. Why did you keep me? And not having any judgments about her decision to keep me or not. If that makes sense, that thought would even be in her mind. So that was a very difficult thing that jumped out at me. But I think also what it opened up to me was, I didn't know my grandmother very well. I was fortunate to meet her when I was 12 years old and lived with her for a while, when my mother was back in St. Lucia, but I didn't really know her. And I'm realizing that, wow, we praise people and, in society who are rich or have titles, king, queen, millionaire, billionaire, all that. And there are some everyday heroes in our midst that change the legacy and change the trajectory of the life of generations that don't get the fanfare that they deserve and that are unsung heroes. I feel like my mother is one of them. But when I look at my grandmother, who kept my mother's children so she could go off to Canada and see what she could see. And I think about my aunt, my mother's oldest sibling, oldest sister, who is, I think, 15 or 16 years older, who helped my grandmother rather, care for her children. I discovered this strength and this lineage of women that I'm a part of, that Nova is a part of. And honestly, Lianne, there's this sense of pride that I have. And I'm like, the celebrating people who have money and titles and movie stars in Hollywood, yeah, cool, that sounds cool. But I look at the 15 grandchildren that my mother has and the one great grand, and how our life is so different than her humble beginnings selling on the beach. That's a hero to me. That's who I really want to celebrate.
Having greater clarity on, what she experienced, on your childhood and some of the adversity that you experienced as a child, some of the challenges you experienced as an athlete, as you've outlined. I wonder, how has your view of adversity been influenced now that you are a mom yourself?
Yeah, I would say that there's an irony to the fact that I am and had been for, more than a decade, one of the best hurdlers of the world. Like my job for more than a decade was literally to like jump obstacles, right? But the irony to that is I was born to a woman whose life was marred with figurative hurdles, right? The poverty, the homelessness, the lack of education, the racism, and that she would overcome those figurative hurdles in her life. So I say to everyone, like my first coach, my first influence of, how to overcome on the track was my mother. When I look at adversity, it to me is the best teacher of anything. It's the best teacher of who you really are, getting to know yourself and what you're made of. You have to confront who you really think you are when you fall in front of the world as the world champion, as the favorite. In your country, your name is on magazine covers, you're on cereal boxes, you're on billboards, you're in the subway system in Toronto, you're like everywhere. And suddenly you're flat on your butt on a track. You really have to know who you are. And to me, that really taught me who I am. And the fact that we are not defined by any one moment, any one failure. In fact, I've learned more from those shortcomings than I have any gold medal, any Canadian record, any athlete of the year accolade that I've ever been given. I've learned more from those hard moments. So I challenge people to look at failure as a badge and as a well of strength that you can draw from, because even 17 years after Athens, I'm still drawing strength from that experience. Nothing has broken me more than that. And I am still here. I am still standing. And I think of that moment as a moment of pride for me.
It's interesting, Perdita, we live in a world where many parents really struggle deeply with allowing their kids to experience any kind of adversity. The idea for many parents is that they want to, in many ways, bubble wrap their kids and protect them as much as possible. I mean, I think any parent wants to make sure that there's no harm that comes to their child. How do you, having experienced everything you have, having the diverse lens that you have on adversity and overcoming it, how do you marry those different perspectives as a young mother yourself?
Yeah. There's times where, Nova is just two, but she'll run and she'll fall. And my instinct is to run over and comfort her. And of course I should. I'm her mother. But there are times where I tell myself even now, no. Don't rush to pick her up and kiss her and hug her. Let her console herself first and get up and, and see how she handles and deals with that. Because the truth of it is, I'm not always going to be there when she stumbles. I'm not always going to be there when she falls. And I want to inform my 2-year-old daughter to be her best friend and her best advocate in any difficult situation. It might just be scraping her knee, but I want her to be that person first for herself. And, at times when I'm just worried and I'm scared for her, she'll get up, she'll have a little whimper or whatever. And she'll say, hurt. And then, she'll be okay. And then I'll go over and I'll hug her and I'll kiss her after she's made peace or whatever it is with that moment, right? And I guess what I'm trying to say is, as parents, that is our natural inkling, right? Is to want to be there. I have an issue even with, sports where, everyone gets a ribbon, everyone gets a medal, you're 8th and last or whatever, you get a trophy. No, cut that out, right? Teach your child what it means to feel that sting of a loss, that disappointment, because that's really how they garner grit. That's really where they get the toughness and that kind of, rough around the edges, that they'll need to go through life. But if you're always praising your child, you're always, celebrating and giving them, something without it being earned, you're doing a disservice, because the world is not going to give that to your child, right? And I think that for me, you can love your child and parent your child with all the love and the empathy, but you still have to understand that you will make them better people and stronger people if you allow them to taste some of that defeat and that disappointment, that devastation. You're still there to counsel, right? You're still out there to be the sounding board and to stand tall beside them and with them. But I think it's okay to let them feel some of those scars, because if you think about any of us who've ever had a cut or a wound, right? Oh, it stings, it hurts, it sucks. But then once it heals over, that skin is actually stronger, right, than it was before. Well, that's what you're allowing your child to be tougher and stronger than they were before. So I caution any parent to kind of like let off, right, if you're kind of tempted to kind of coddle your child through those experiences.
And it's, in so many ways, it's easier said than done as they go through the different ages and stages. I want to ask you, when you go back and you think about those Olympic Games 17 years ago in 2004, what enabled you to get up and keep moving forward after what you described, probably the most difficult moment of your life? When you look back on it now, having done this book and all the research and connecting all those dots, what in that moment do you think gave you the strength, the courage, and everything else you needed to continue?
In the moments after falling, and you have to understand, I'm the world champion, right? That didn't disappear. I'm the world champion, a huge target on my back. And the first thing you do after a major race is you go through the mix zone. And if anyone doesn't know what the mix zone is, that's where the world's press is lined up. It's like this big labyrinth, media from all around the world is there to speak, for you to speak to as an athlete. And I remember in that moment, the opportunity to just shuffle by and not say anything and to just ignore the world's press and just move on. And I thought, I can't. I don't know what's happened. I am completely disoriented. I'm, fallen violently. I'm injured. My pride is wounded, but I can't blow past everyone. So to really answer your question about what got me through that moment, it was such a strong sense of self, a strong sense of knowing exactly who I was. And I had never defined myself by any one of my successes or my losses. Now, had I ever thought that I would fall? No. Did I ever think I would fall so spectacularly or there? No. Right? But I never was so married to the accolades and the success and the money, right? Like I said, I was on the cover of Cheerios boxes. You could go to any store in any province in Canada and you would see my face. You would go to billboards and drive past, downtown Toronto, my hometown of Pickering, and you'd see my face. But I was never so married to that identity because that wasn't really who I was. It was what I did. So I think when you've built something so tall, right, this identity, success, that when it all crumbles down, right, if you aren't sure who you are as a leader, as a woman, as a person, then those successes, those wins, the money, the title, the promotion, don't ever complete you because you don't know who you are. And I think I was able to rise and get up because my mother had built me to know who I was. So I could go and be like, no, I'm talking. I will answer your question. Because even though that was the darkest, most devastating moment of my life, I knew that I was never a person that would run. I was never a person that would shy away from a difficult moment. How could I? How dare I? When I was a witness to seeing my mother overcome her own devastating moments, right? Of poverty, of homelessness, of my dad literally putting her out in the middle of the night and me being the one at 5 or 6 years old to go and collect her things on the front lawn, her perfume, her necklaces, her heels, because she didn't want the neighbors to see her shame. So how could I, in that moment, ever be somebody that would crawl away because a moment was hard? That's not who I was raised to be. And so Athens, as much as it crushed me, it could never break me. And that's why I could get up. Now, it wasn't easy, but I could get up because of that.
Perdita Felicien, author of A Mother's Daughter, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.